She thought I was a lost delivery driver who'd pulled into the wrong driveway. That's what my daughter thought, the first time she saw me in 11 years. She was standing on the porch of the house I built with my own hands, the cedar siding I'd nailed up plank by plank the summer before she started high school. The wraparound deck I'd poured the footings for myself because I couldn't afford a contractor. And she looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's taken a wrong turn. "Can I help you?" she said. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there on the gravel path, looking at her face. She had her mother's eyes. She always had her mother's eyes. "I'm looking for the property owner," I said. "That would be my uncle," she said. "He's not available right now." I nodded, told her I'd come back, got back in my rental car and drove 2 kilometers down the road before I had to pull over because I couldn't see the highway anymore. My name is Edmund Baxter. I'm 63 years old. I spent 11 years in a coma. Not the whole 11 years. No, but close enough that it doesn't much matter. A stroke took me down in January of 2013, in the parking lot of the mill I'd run for 22 years outside Collingwood, Ontario. I was 52. I had a daughter, a son-in-law, a piece of land on the Georgian Bay shoreline, worth somewhere around $4 million, and a brother who had been waiting his whole life for exactly that moment. The doctors told me later that the first 2 years were the worst, that I had less than a 15% chance of any meaningful recovery. My brother, I'll call him my brother because that's what he was on paper, though I've had to rethink the word entirely, apparently told the hospital that I had expressed wishes not to be kept on extraordinary measures. He produced a document. The hospital's legal team reviewed it. My daughter was 19 at the time, still in her first year at Laurentian, and she didn't know enough yet to question what adults in positions of authority were telling her. He didn't pull the plug. To his credit, or perhaps just to his cowardice, he didn't go that far, but he moved fast in every other direction. Within 8 months of my stroke, he had been granted power of attorney through a proceeding I was never properly notified of, for the obvious reason that I was unconscious. Within 14 months, the property, the 43 acres on Georgian Bay, the house, the dock, the 3 rental cabins I'd built one by one over the course of a decade, had been transferred into a numbered company he controlled with his wife. My daughter, who by that point had dropped out of university to be closer to me, was told the transfer was a tax measure, something to do with estate planning. She was 20 years old, and she trusted him because he was the only family she had left, and because she had no reason yet to understand what he actually was. I woke up, really woke up, not the partial surfacings I'd had before, in the spring of 2022. I was in a long-term care facility in Barrie. I had been transferred there from the hospital at some point in 2015, and I had no memory of it. A nurse named Constance was doing her rounds when she noticed I was tracking her movement with my eyes in a way I hadn't before. She called the attending physician. The attending physician called a neurologist from Toronto. The neurologist spent 3 weeks running assessments before she would commit to telling me what I already knew, which was that I was back. The rehabilitation was another 14 months. Speech, motor function, memory sequencing. There were days I wanted to give up. Mornings when I'd reach for a word, and it would simply not be there, like a drawer that opens to nothing. But I kept thinking about my daughter. I kept thinking about the cedar siding and the wraparound deck and the view of the bay at first light in October, when the water goes the color of pewter and the air smells like wood smoke and cold stone. I kept thinking about the fact that I had built something and that it was still there and that I intended to see it again. My legal situation was complicated. That's the most honest way I can put it. I had been legally incapacitated for nearly a decade, during which time a man I trusted had restructured my assets through a series of transactions that were, on the surface, entirely legitimate. My estate lawyer, I hired her in the fall of 2023, after I'd been discharged from rehab and was renting a room in a boarding house in Barrie, spent 4 months just reading documents before she gave me her assessment. He was careful, she said. Whoever advised him was good. Can we undo it? I asked. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a long moment. I think so, she said. But it's going to take time, and it's going to depend on what we can find. What we needed to find was evidence that the power of attorney had been obtained fraudulently. Specifically, that the document my brother had presented to the hospital did not reflect my actual wishes, and that he had known this when he presented it. We also needed evidence of the asset transfers. Most of that was already on paper. The question was whether the paper told a story that a court would act on. My lawyer referred me to a forensic accountant. The forensic accountant spent 6 weeks going through the corporate filings for the numbered company. What he found was not subtle once you knew how to look. Money had moved from the rental cabin income into a separate account my brother controlled personally. Maintenance invoices had been filed against the property for work that had never been done. I recognized the descriptions because I knew every square foot of that land, and I knew which things had and hadn't needed fixing. The numbers were wrong in ways that added up, over 11 years, to something significant. In the meantime, I had not contacted my daughter. This was the hardest decision I made through this entire period, and I want to be honest about why I made it. I was afraid, not of her, but of what I might find. 11 years is a long time. She had built a life, or something resembling one, and I didn't know what I was to her anymore. I didn't know if she'd been told things about me, about my wishes, about why the property had been transferred, about who I was and what I'd wanted. My brother is a persuasive man. He had had 11 years to shape the story. I hired a researcher. I don't know what else to call her. She described herself as specializing in asset tracing and personal investigations to find out what my daughter's situation actually was. What she found took me about a week to fully process. My daughter was living in the main house, the house I built. But she was not living there as the owner's daughter, or as a guest, or as anything with a title that implied standing. She was managing the property, cooking and cleaning for my brother and his wife when they came up from Toronto on weekends, coordinating the rental cabin bookings, doing the landscaping. She had been doing this for somewhere between 6 and 7 years, living in what had been her childhood home in a status that my researcher described, carefully, as somewhat ambiguous. My brother paid her, technically, not well. She had no lease, no formal employment contract, nothing in writing that acknowledged she had any claim to the land or the structures or anything else. I drove up to Collingwood in early March of this year. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see it with my own eyes before I did anything else. I pulled up the gravel drive just after noon on a Tuesday, when I knew from the researcher's notes that my brother and his wife would be in Toronto. My daughter was on the front porch, stacking firewood. She was wearing a canvas jacket that had been mine 30 years ago. I recognized the tear in the left pocket where I'd caught it on a fence nail. She looked up. I was wearing a hat, and I hadn't shaved in 2 weeks because I didn't want to be recognized until I was ready. She looked at me the way you look at a lost delivery driver. "Can I help you?" she said. "I'm looking for the property owner," I said. "That would be my uncle," she said. "He's not available right now." I drove away. I pulled over 2 kilometers down the road. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, and I let myself feel it fully. Everything I'd been holding at a distance for the past year, the waste of it, the sheer, grinding waste, 11 years and a life that had been unmade while I was unconscious and couldn't defend it. Then I dried my face, pulled back onto the highway and called my lawyer. "I've seen enough," I said. "Let's move. Here is what I have to tell you about the Canadian legal system, in case you've never had reason to become familiar with it the way I have. It is slow, it is expensive, and when it finally moves, it moves with a completeness that is almost difficult to watch." My lawyer had already been in contact with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. The forensic accountant's report had gone in 2 months earlier. What I didn't know, what she told me that afternoon, was that the investigation had progressed further than she'd let on, because she hadn't wanted to give me false hope before she was sure. They had found the same irregularities in the maintenance invoices. They had found more. There had been insurance claims filed on the rental cabins for storm damage in 2018. A real storm, a bad one. I'd seen the news reports from my care facility, but the repair costs that had been claimed bore no resemblance to what had actually been spent. Someone in the claims process had noticed. It had been flagged. The flag had been sitting in a queue until my accountant's report connected it to the broader pattern. I did not get to watch the moment my brother was served. I had asked to be there, and my lawyer had strongly advised against it, and I had, eventually, listened to her. But I did get a call that evening from the RCMP investigator assigned to the file. who told me, in the careful language of someone who has learned not to make promises, that the process was underway. I called my daughter the next morning. I had practiced what I was going to say. I had written it out, actually, on a notepad, and then thrown the notepad away because it sounded like a speech, and I didn't want to give her a speech. I wanted to tell her the truth. "This is Edmund Baxter," I said when she answered. "I'm your father. I'm not dead. I'm in Collingwood. Can I buy you a cup of coffee?" There was a silence that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "The man who came to the house," she said. Not a question. She'd known, or she'd suspected. I still don't know exactly what she saw in my face that afternoon, but something had reached her. "Yes," I said. Another silence. "Where?" she said. "We met at a diner on Ontario Street that has been there since the 1970s. I was there 20 minutes early, and I sat in a booth by the window and watched the parking lot. When she walked in, she was still wearing the canvas jacket with the torn pocket. She stood at the entrance scanning the room, and when she found me, she stopped walking for a moment, just stopped, and then she came and sat down across from me and she looked at my hands. I think she was looking for something familiar, something she remembered, and then she looked at my face, and I watched 11 years of confusion try to rearrange itself into something she could hold on to. I didn't try to explain everything at once. My lawyer had prepared me for this too, that there would be things my daughter believed, had been told, that would need to be unwound carefully, and that it wasn't going to happen in a single conversation. We talked for 3 hours. We ordered coffee, and then food, and then more coffee, and the diner filled up and emptied out around us. She cried twice. I cried once. At some point, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything, and we just sat like that for a while. She had known something was wrong, not from the beginning. She'd been 20 years old and grieving and in no position to question anything, but over the years, things hadn't added up. The way the property transfer had been explained to her, the way her position on the land had never been formalized, despite her asking. Little inconsistencies in things her uncle had told her about my final months before the stroke. She had pushed them down because the alternative, that the person she had trusted to manage her father's affairs had instead stolen everything, was too much to absorb. It wasn't too much anymore. She sat across from me in that diner and let herself know what she had probably already half known for years. My brother and his wife were arrested in their Toronto home 6 weeks later. The charges included fraud over $5,000, breach of fiduciary duty, and multiple counts related to the fraudulent insurance claims. Their lawyers are very good. The process will take time. I have made my peace with that, mostly. The property is the subject of ongoing civil litigation. My lawyer is confident. The phrase she uses is cautiously optimistic, which from her I have learned to treat as high praise. The numbered company is frozen pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. I cannot move back in yet, but I drive up there sometimes, in the evenings, and I park on the road and look at the cedars and the line of the bay behind the tree line, and I think about October, when the water pewter and the air smells like wood smoke and cold stone. My daughter has moved out of the main house. She's renting a place in town. We have dinner every Sunday. Her husband, they married in 2020, a small ceremony I obviously wasn't at, though I've since looked at every photograph, makes a beef stew that is genuinely the best thing I've eaten in 11 years. Which, given what I was eating for most of those 11 years, is perhaps not a high bar, but I mean it sincerely. I am not a man who believes much in the idea of getting back what was taken. Time doesn't work that way. 11 years are 11 years, and there are things I missed that I can't recover. Her graduation, her wedding, the early years of a marriage I had to learn about through photographs. Those are gone. But I am sitting in a diner on Ontario Street with my daughter's hand over mine. And the coffee is hot, and outside the window the Georgian Bay light is doing what it always does in late afternoon, going gold and then amber, and then the particular blue that I have never seen anywhere else in the world. I built something here. I am still here. Whatever a man is worth, I don't think it's measured in what he manages to hold on to. I think it's measured in whether he gets back up. I got back up.